Hey, everybody. Welcome to day 2 of hashtag Higher Ed with our next panel that we have today. I just need to get my notes. Otherwise, I'm just going to forget everything because it's just been that kind of day. What can universities do to prepare students for careers, or is it already too late? Again, I feel that we have a really cool array of people that are going to be talking about this subject. We have people who created their own internships, who are dealing with the struggles of working on HBCU campuses where there are just fewer resources. Someone who works in career services with a huge caseload of students, and then also someone who does education outside of higher ed and in the corporate world, and kind of seeing where are we already. So I'm really excited about this panel in particular. Thank you so much for joining us. I think yesterday was a really, I think I'm going to chalk it up to a success. I think we had a lot of people join us for the workshops as well. I had a lot of positive feedback from the workshop host and co-host. And so thank you so much for doing that. We have a lot more today. Right after this particular meeting, we have another AMA that's going to be with Michelle Campbell. And she designed a career development course for graduate students and for free. And she enrolled 150 students and then taught that course just because she's amazing. And so you can tune in with her, ask her anything. There's also one of yesterday's panelists, Alan Langer, optimize your LinkedIn profile to be seen and remembered. And then also Christy Lodge, reframing your academic mindset, how to identify and shift the beliefs that hold you back. And just as a side note, like all three of these people are just amazing folk who want to help. They've helped me, and they want to help you. And so I hope that you go and attend. So today I'm just going to introduce our panel, and then the format that it will take, I'll bring them on the screen. And then I'll jump off the screen after I ask the question and be kind of like moderating the comments. Be sure that you make a comment if you have a question for us. Okay. Oh, hey, yeah, there's a scrolling thing at the bottom. Please, if you are able to support this, we have over 20 hours of donated coaching services from all of our panelists, or from many of our panelists. We also have several books, and we have a 6-week course. We have a lot of things. I'm just going to stop talking about that. You can look on the website. I'm going to start this panel. Okay, so here we go. I'm just going to bring them on the screen and let them introduce themselves, kind of tell them, let them tell you where they're from and what they do, and then we'll go ahead and get started. So we have Annabelle, Myra, Temptaous, and Sammie. Could you please introduce yourselves? Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, what order do you want us to go in?
Let's start with Annabelle. Let's go with there, and then we'll just go kind of around the clock.
Okay, cool.
So I'm Dr. Annabelle Frazier. I work for the Massachusetts Committee for Public Counsel Services. That is the Massachusetts statewide public defender agency. And I also teach graduate students in psychology for Southern New Hampshire University.
Okay, so I guess I'll go next since we're going around. I'm Myra Roldan. I am a program manager at Amazon. I work at on the AWS Educate portion of Amazon. We're a small team at an initiative that's a public education initiative to integrate cloud computing and technology into the general education space. I work with higher ed. I work with institutions globally. I think right now I'm working with about 200 institutions globally, working with a lot of your institutions. So with the panelist institutions here, which is exciting for me to get to see some faces and learn a little bit more.
Hello all, my name is Sammie Herrera. I work currently in my role as a career coach at the University of Florida, specifically for the College of Agricultural and Life Sciences. I actually recently started this role in late March or so a lot of my role had been remote, Previously, my work had been in diversity and inclusion at a private liberal arts college, so within the student affairs, diversity, inclusion, and career services space. I'm excited to be here today, support higher ed, and help current professionals really connect their experiences and think expansively about what they can do, whether or not they want to stay in higher education or they want to move elsewhere.
Good morning, y'all. My name is Dr. Temptaous Mckoy. I'm assistant professor at Bowie State University in Bowie, Maryland, an HBCU. So my focus is on decentering some of the privileged practices in technical and professional communication. So I work exclusively with Black and Brown students on how to prepare themselves to go into the workforce and how to diversify technical and professional communication as a field, both in and outside of the academy. So that's Temptaous.
We can't hear you, Eric. You're
Nobody
muted.
can hear me. Now there's a big sign that says your mic is muted, and everybody's telling me that. Thank you, technology and people. I am very excited to have all of you here because as I just mentioned, I think that we have across the board, from the undergraduate experience through the graduate student experience and then afterwards, I think that we can have a really interesting conversation about some of the things that universities are doing well, but in a way that we've had to kind of step in on our own to boost that up a little bit, and just having that conversation. And so with that in mind, I'll throw up the first question right here. And again, to our audience, please send us your questions. That makes the conversation a lot more engaging. And so we'll start with this one. So it's like there's a common theme often, and that I've been talking about with a lot of folk, just when I was both inside and outside of the higher education sphere just recently, that this idea that just universities aren't doing enough for students. Like we have a whole bunch of students that are graduating that are just ill-prepared for the workforce. And so if that is true or not, what are your thoughts? And so let's go ahead. Let's start with Annabelle. Would you like to go ahead and kick us off with this one?
Yeah, so I think that it varies, it differs, right? From my experience, what I saw, even as I was going through my own PhD, is that universities often do reasonably well with their science undergraduates. I think they know how to help those students prepare for careers, and those majors are easier to translate. But I'm a psychology and law researcher. And first of all, students, even at the undergraduate level, students who were interested in pursuing that area, nobody could really guide them into any kind of career direction. And I think it was particularly pronounced with graduate students and with PhDs, because it seemed like if you didn't go into academia, where there is no job market right now, you went nowhere. Nobody could tell you where to go. Nobody could tell you how to prepare. And there was no way to set up a plan, which you need to do the kind of work I do. So I absolutely agree that universities aren't doing enough. I think career centers sometimes aren't set up for graduate students in some universities. And faculty don't really know how to help because a lot of them have not been anywhere but academia. So when I started my work, I actually developed an internship for students, both undergraduate and graduate, to teach them about how to do research in an applied setting. And I think we need more of those partnerships. I think we need collaboration between faculty and people who work in these environments.
Yeah, so Annabelle, so you bring up an interesting point there, right? And I really don't think that it's that the universities aren't doing enough. I think they're doing what they can with the resources they have. And having spoken to and interacted with hundreds of universities and colleges around the globe. I think every institution is strapped financially, and we all know that educators get paid pennies. And so I think the problem isn't that the institutions aren't doing enough. I think that the focus, they're not organized in a way to focus on building competencies. So a lot of institutions, and by what I mean by this is that a lot of institutions, when they offer their courses, it's more like, let's toss a dart at the wall and let's see what sticks, right? Let's start throwing gum, actually, and not even darts. Let's start throwing gum and see what sticks. And those are the courses we're going to offer. So, I've been working with institutions to help them and really guide them towards competency-based learning. So what is the job that you're aligning to? What are the things someone needs to learn in order to come out at the end with the right competencies to be market ready? And so we've been doing that, and we haven't been doing it long. We've only been doing it for about 18 months right now. And we've had some really good success, and we're getting some really quick wins with students. And it's a model that's starting to trickle through other areas of institutions, right? So I work with a lot of tech degree programs, but we're starting to see a lot of financial programs come in, a lot of English programs, math programs, business programs. They're starting to come in and really try to figure out, like, how do we adopt this competency base so we can prepare students, because it requires, they're understanding that it's requiring them reaching out to their larger community, to employers and partners to help do that, to help prepare students, because we've all heard that term, it takes a village. So that's kind of my take on it.
Yeah, also I wanted to chime in. I think one of the first questions we might want to consider, what exactly does enough look like, right? So we can have the criticism that they're not doing enough, but so for my students at Bowie State, their enough can be one thing in comparison to when I was at East Carolina University. Their enough was completely different. So maybe at Bowie State, that enough may mean equipping Black students to be prepared to develop their resumes that are clean, sharp, and ready to go, while still using their networking that they have already learned. While at East Carolina University, that may look like further developing their writing practices, because I've taught the business writing courses. So there's a more of an emphasis there. So before I can kind of even say if we're doing enough or not, I think that probably is the question. What does enough look like for your student population or the students that you're serving? And what is their wants and outcomes? I think that's a major thing, because a lot of times we think what's good for us is good for everybody. And it kind of goes back to what Annabelle was saying. A lot of times we come up under mentors who have only been in the academy. That's all they kind of know. So, they reproduce themselves in this weird, funky way that's not intended to create harm. But as a result, you just kind of have the cycle that's continuing itself. And until you have a student that's willing to kind of speak up and say, hey, this is not the career for me, this doesn't work for me, then we are not able to really develop the ways that we can mentor and help these students go along their way.
I completely agree, Dr. Mckoy. I think a part of that enough, or thinking about that hypothetical ideal of what does enough look like at universities, I think part of that would be if, even though it's institutional specific, all faculty and staff still have an understanding that part of their responsibility is related to the career success for students. And so, for example, you talked about that reproduction of academia between academics, but if we can help faculty and staff understand that, okay, you're not working in career services, you're in residence life, but you're helping build to that institutional mission of these competencies, of this career success, of these first destinations and more, or even toward graduate school and other experiences that can still lead toward industry. I think that's an important mindset shift for the professionals in higher education. I think for students, again, if we're thinking of that ideal and the thought process as well, would be that major choice isn't career choice. as talked about a lot by Catherine Brooks, who works at Vanderbilt University, but also that once you make a major choice, that doesn't mean you stop exploring. So I see a lot of students, I work at the University of Florida, and our tagline is experience changes everything. And our goal is that every student has at least one significant experience that really alters their mindset or helps them understand their career goals. Even if it's like, oh, well, I don't want to work in community services anymore. That's still something that's super helpful for students to understand, okay, now I can explore other areas. Now, you know, my first original path wasn't the one that I was thinking of. That can be really helpful. And so that exploratory mindset and that mindset of being a lifelong learner and that I'm not going to wait to get an internship in the thing that I want to do. I'm going to gain experiences, maybe even if they're co-ops or volunteer experiences or student organization experiences that let me learn and grow. So I'm not waiting until my internship the summer before my senior year and then realizing that's not what I want to do.
My mics work. Okay, my marks. Okay. All right. So I feel like there's there's a little bit of a question that I have, and I love this question that Dr. Mckoy raised about like how do we define enough, and then we take that and we take Myra's comment of like, well, we have established core competencies that we have established is like, you know, like, hey. We're seeing the population that's coming, like, and we're working with universities to identify what those are, so that we can help. In the way that Myra put it, I think was to. It's not that they're what is enough, but we're not organized in the way to do that. And the thing that is coming up frequently throughout this entire thread is this idea of collaboration with the community, like reaching out. And so we have a big question that I feel that we have to ask is who gets to decide what is enough, because as Dr. Mckoy said, it's going to be institution specific. And if you push that line of thinking even further, it must be student specific. Mm-hmm. How do we do that? But before we can answer that, we have to answer who gets to help decide. Is it going to be students? Should we be consulting within their own faculty, or is that going to be groupthink? Do we go out and receive like corporate consultation? Like what are the connotations, good and bad, of that? So let's go in that direction. Myra, do you want to start us off with that one?
Yeah, so I think you have a bunch of different points in there, right? So we're talking about students, institutions, and corporations. So if we break it down into those 3 points, I think with students going in, a lot of them, and I'm of the personal belief that making an 18-year-old figure out what they want to do for the rest of their life is just wrong, right? Like at 18, I decided to come to the States and just kind of like be an adventure and figure out my life, right? I have 3 girls. I have one in college right now, my last one in college. And again, she is still at that stage. She's going to be 21 and she still doesn't know what she wants to do, right? So I think that we're putting that pressure on to have a young person figure out their life that's a burden that we're putting on them. I think what educators can do and corporations is to collaborate together to help educators understand what are the opportunities that are out there in the real world, right? I usually do that with data. I do a lot of research around labor market data at a global perspective to understand what jobs are out there and what skills are employers looking for and looking at trends. So partnering with corporations, especially your regional organizations, whether it's small business startups, you can, as educators and as institutions, right? Like sometimes at the institution level, if you can get buy-in, it's great. But sometimes it's a matter of the educators figuring out like, okay, so I'm teaching these specific courses. How do I bring in resources externally to help these students understand like why these skills are important and how they're going to apply them in the real world when they go out there and they get a job, whatever job that is. And then these are the opportunities that are tied to like the competencies they're learning in my class or in this degree program as a whole or from this institution. So you can take it at different levels to help them, to help guide them, right? So like I said, students just don't know. Like you don't know what you don't know. If you don't know, like, no, if you had told me I was going to be a program manager at Amazon in the tech space, I would have been like, I don't even know what that is, right? Like what are you talking about? So I think exposing students and giving them access to like explore, like Sammie said, is really important. So what do you think, Sammie?
Yes, I think that's crucial. I feel like a lot of our more successful career programs, so when in-house, that we host, are ones that we co-host with a current alum as well as our employers. It really reinforces, like what you said, some of the things we as coaches tell students. These are the competencies. These are the ways we see them. Oh, okay, Sammie's just saying it. Oh, this person at Amazon said it. Maybe I'll take that a little bit more to heart. So it's really helpful in pulling those connections, and especially at those larger schools when you have such a large network, and even it's the small privates or the smaller schools. You have more of that close-knit community. Folks want to come back, maybe even after their first year, just to talk about what was that transition like? What was your first 90 days like? I feel like there's so many of those types of transitional work skills as well that people don't think of until they're Googling it the night before that they start their new internship or their new job. And so I completely agree. I feel like institutional message regarding those competencies with examples about how to live them throughout in various student affairs functional areas and various departments. I know one of the departments I'm really impressed with in our College of Agricultural and Life Sciences is our horticultural sciences, because they've completely redone their academic coursework to be more internship, to be more experientially led, and even rethinking some of the electives that they host, because sometimes students are interested, especially their second semester, senior year, okay, I'm going to take gardening, I'm going to take this, that, and the third, but how is it connected to what you want to do immediately after? What are some of the things that you can only get at the University of Florida versus, a community gardening program in your local community after you graduate? So really being strategic about what are the courses I take, what are the experiences I have, but how do I also have many experiences so I can choose from them?
And if I would love to piggyback off of what you just said as well. I'm thinking of because obviously, like I mentioned, HBCU work is the work that I do, right? So in thinking of HBCU culture and what happens in these spaces and community, I'm thinking of how your Black Greek letter organizations, you have your different modeling troops, you have your dance clubs, you have all of these things that Black students are finding themselves involved in that a lot of times they may not know transfer to work experience in other places. Maybe they don't know that, hey, you just planned a whole step show, a 12-minute step show. You have these guidelines that you had to adhere to. You had to plan the music, cut the music. You had to do all of these things. This is a skill set that many people don't have. And it's one thing that I've noticed since I went to East Carolina University for my PhD, where I taught, which is a PWI, predominantly white institution. And now I'm currently at an HBCU, and I attended an HBCU, Elizabeth City State University. And I'm learning how those experiences are popping up, but then I'm also learning how resource availability makes such a difference in students knowing or learning that those skills are transferable. So at East Carolina, it's much easier to connect those students with that accounting firm that's up on the corner, because that same accounting firm paid for the football stadium, right? So it's easy for that to happen in that space. In comparison to where I'm at Bowie State, there's a whole lot more groundwork that has to happen on my part, which is perfectly fine. But it's not as explicit or on the level for the students to see that they have access to these things, right? Because it's just not as seen. It's not there. Bowie State is a community college. So most of my students are coming in. They're not staying on campus. They're working. They're learning a lot of things about themselves. So I think so much of what both of you are getting at about that skill transfer is so important for us to really pull and dig out of our students a bit more.
Mm-hmm.
And I might take it.
Oh, I apologize.
Okay. Mm-hmm. It's okay. I might take it a little bit further than that. Skill transfer and recognizing skills is useful, but I think for a lot of students, and I deal a lot with older students and students who are career changers and students who are first gen, and for a lot of them, it's really talking to them about the opportunities and what those actually require, and being able to broadly describe those to them. you are pursuing a major X, here are the 15 different things that you could do with that major. It's not just 2. So that requires a lot of collaboration, and not just, you don't have to refer the student to the accounting firm down the street, but you have to know there's an accounting firm and who that accounting firm hires if you're in accounting.
Here's what I love, here's what I'm hearing from this conversation is that every institution and even down to the individual, right, is its own culture. Like we are our own culture. And then we have to understand that that different school cultures are going to have different requirements. Like whether we're working with graduate students who are making that transition, or working in HBCUs or working in ag, all these cool things. And what it comes down to is communication. Like Dr. Mckoy, I am a rhetoric writing scholar person, technical communication, and it's what I love. And all of this is about we know that we have value. Our students know that they have value. I don't think that there are, in my optimistic mind frame, I don't think that there are corporations out there who devalue humans. I think that they value people, but what the problem is that we're seeing is lack of communication. It's the lack of being able to translate that value. And so there's a couple of things that I'm seeing is not only establishing and helping them understand, our students, that they do have value, and then understanding what those outlets are for those value, with our collaborative community partners. But it's also helping each one know how to talk to the other one. That's an experience that I had to go through. I went at my last institution through an HSI training, Hispanic Serving Institution, where I thought I was pretty in with how things worked. And then I went through this training. I was like, oh, wow, this is worse than I thought. And there are still more things for me to learn about how to value what my students bring. And that took a moment of humility on my part to say, okay, this is a problem that I can't just say, well, why aren't you doing it? Why are you doing it this way? When I should be valuing those things. And so let's kind of take this question, what are some of the really concrete ways that you have specifically helped a student see that value or have that value? Because we've been talking pretty abstract, and it's easy to critique that institution idea that we were talking about before. But let's celebrate some of these joys. What were some of those success stories where yeah, this person had they discovered how to communicate their value in a way that was really meaningful. Sammie, do you want to start us off with if you have a story with that?
Yeah. So I really love working in career services. I think even thinking about my own transferable skills, my majors in undergrad were psychology and Hispanic studies. And oftentimes people, would critique the Hispanic studies piece and they'd be like, oh, that's cool, or, oh, that's weird, blah, blah, blah. Or kind of relegate it to, oh, that's ethnic studies. That doesn't really matter. But my focus was in translation. And I feel like I've literally been able to translate my skills in language and helping other people understand that there is a language around career services. There are languages around industry. How do you review job descriptions to understand what is the language and how they describe, for example, animal sciences or horticulture, family, youth, community sciences, and how do you gain access into learning some of that language? And so I think a lot in the ideas of reframing and thought processes as well. And so I think when I work with students, a lot of my successes, especially recently, is when I have specific meetings with undergraduate students about exploring their career options, listening to their stories, and then relating them back to them in a different way. and highlighting, I have built this expertise in this career language and you can build it as well. Let's learn this together. And I learned it when I was an undergraduate student working in career services as my first employment experience. So recognizing that it is accessible, it just takes that amount of time. And I also really enjoy working with graduate students as well. I know explicitly graduate students ask, like, I don't know what this career language is. I don't know how to reframe or describe these things. And because I'm an expert in what I do, I kind of just rattle it off and they're like, what? And it's like, well, you're an expert in this, I'm an expert in this. So let's work together. Everyone can need a coach in anything. And so I find a lot of successes when we have those one-on-ones, or even when I have exploration-based group experiences. I hosted a presentation called Possible Lives for Pre-Professional Students. So really opening up, how do we understand what your first choice is, and what are some of the other things that excite you in your life that you didn't realize that you still be in your path that can replace that pre-professional major, or can be your hobby, or how you build your other experiences. So those have been some of my successes and why I'm in career services and how I find joy working with students.
Dr. Frazier, could you share us some stories as well?
Absolutely. So I think some of my favorite success stories come when I get students who come into our agency, which is a government-run law firm, essentially. And they have the culture shock, that very first culture shock of working with attorneys. Because a lot of the students that come to me come from criminal justice psychology majors, and they're interested in forensic stuff and defense and litigation consulting and all of these different research domains. And then they encounter lawyers, and they realize that lawyers speak a different language, and they have their own culture, and sometimes they're really students, especially younger students in our internship, a lot of times come to me with shock. Oh my God, they're so argumentative. And I think that's fantastic, because that opens their experience to what this environment actually is. Right? If you're going to be doing this work, you will probably work with lawyers. So how are we going to teach you to be comfortable in this environment and argue back if you need to, and show some confidence, and also not interpret it in the same way that you might interpret it in another environment, because lawyers get paid to argue. This is what they do. So for me, those are my favorite. My favorite are the ones where students suddenly recognize the culture of the environment and start adapting to it, because then they can articulate what they need to learn, and I can really guide them through it. But there are others too. There are other success stories that are important. So all of the students in our internship program have their own individual projects. And the reason for that is because they're going to have to be able to show something for it. It's not just, yeah, I spent 6 months in this internship. It's, here's what I did, and here's how I know to do it. And they can show that to a prospective employer and actually talk about the things that they did, how they did them, what their results were. And they practice those things with us. So I think those are the kinds of success stories that even individual faculty in academia can replicate. You too can take your students and expose them to these environments, and you can give them individual projects that they can talk about.
Yeah, let's go let's go with Dr. Mckoy. Kind of like keeping it on the university side of the success story, and then Myra, tell us like one of your success stories that you've had working in your experience that you've had.
It's all right. Can y'all hear me? I wasn't sure if the mute thing was on that. My bad, fam. But in thinking of my success stories, there are kind of two. One, it would be when students realize that like they don't have to be so grammar stricken and beating their head up against the wall. Like when we're trying to understand how they're communicating through their business documents and talking to other stakeholders and things of that nature. Like actually getting students to see like, nah, like your community culture, the way you interact with people, the way you know how to navigate social media, those things matter on a whole nother level, because a lot of times our students are my students specifically, are trying to fight this battle where they're trying to professionalize themselves. And I'm always trying to remind them to stay true to themselves as well and trying to navigate and negotiate that. But more tangible, I'm thinking of every semester I have my students develop their own website, which at the very beginning, like it starts out as this, oh my God, I can't believe her. She's getting on my nerves. Why? And then by the end of the semester, they always want to revisit it. Like they want to go back, they want to update this website. And normally they'll do it for just themselves so they can have their own professional site. I always tell my students that they are their own brand, right? So if you need to start branding yourselves now. But I've noticed now students are developing websites for like their family ran businesses. So it's like they're seeing it transfer in different ways, which I'm loving. I'm gonna let them turn it in. It's cool for me. But I would say that's the success story for like students seeing that they are a brand like that. Oh, look at you with your caption on the bottom. That would be the big success story, that students understanding that they are a brand.
So I love that. I would say that, yeah, I love everything that all of you have shared. I mentor a lot of students, a lot of female students, also minority backgrounds. I am Hispanic, so I mentor a lot of Black and Hispanic females. And I think something that really gives me a lot of joy is when they share like their background and their story. Everyone has like a different background and story. For example, I'm like, one of the first to graduate from college myself and my family. I come from a really large family and I share that with them. So I think by sharing my story and allowing them to share their story, we can find things that they're interested in, right? Then I can help them kind of design their own path, right? Because I think everyone feels like, and families put a lot of pressure on kids going to college too. It's like, you have to be this, we want you to make us proud, whatever. But sometimes the kids have different passions. Like, you may have parents that they're pushing the student to be like, you have to be a doctor, you have to be a lawyer. We all have heard that, right? And the student may have very different passions. And so I think for me, I like to mentor students and help them find their passion and the things that make them happy, that bring them joy. Because let me just tell you, you go into a career that you really don't like, you're going to be miserable the rest of your life, right? And so it's just interesting because it's liberating for a lot of students. And I've had, so I mentored this one student about 4 years ago. She was a junior in college and she was down this path of going to medical school. And she was just like, I hate all of this. And so we had some really deep conversations. We did some exploration. Very loyal to her parents. We're coming from a very strong Hispanic culture where, you don't go against your parents and their wishes, especially when they're paying for something for you. But we explored other opportunities for her to look for other avenues to explore her passion or what she considered a passion. And it was interesting because it ended up that she was passionate in something medical driven, just not being a doctor. And so she ended up pivoting and going to nursing school. And it turned out really well for her because that was her passion, right? And I think that for me, that is always like a good success story for me, is when I can mentor or coach a student individually, helping them look at their resumes, helping them explore, like, what are you really interested in? Like, right, like, let's just drop all the noise and all the nonsense, and like, what are you really interested in? Like, what piques your ear, and then how do we capitalize on that, right? Like, exploring, like, okay, let's look at your skill set. How do you express that in a resume? And then how do you prepare for an interview? And how do you write your resume in a way where it's going to, one, grab attention, and two, how do you present yourself, as Dr. Mckoy said, your brand, to actually articulate what skills you have that actually transfer into that, so you can at least get a foot in the door. Because I know a lot of people who went to study music, or studied biology, or studied astrophysics, and are now software engineers, right? And they make the best software engineers just because they have that really diverse background. So it's really interesting to me. I've worked with a lot of people through mentoring, coaching, and also through the work that I do with Amazon. And I just think that there's so much we can do as individuals, right? But there's also so much we can do as individuals without like overstretching ourselves.
Yeah, I just want to echo that. Like, there is so much that we can do as individuals, and the key without overstretching ourselves. And I think that the best way to do that is this theme that we've been talking about, is just this idea of collaboration. Like that there is no reason that we should be trying to do this on our own. That we can form these community partnerships, and that admitting, just honestly for me, just admitting, that's a hard thing to do, but you know what, it's a hard thing that's worth doing. I'm just going to throw up a couple of the comments that we have from our. So we're going to. I'll ask one more question. If we have any Q&A from our audience, please send us those questions. We have a few comments right here from Loretta that having them create their own websites is a great idea. That's something that I tried and failed to do with my students. I need to do it better if I get a class again. And then there's right here, their cultural competencies have a market value, and we have to work against a larger, often racist, cultural institutional narrative that wants to flatten that, which is true. Like, I feel like we often are just, we feel like we're fighting against, like, often it's just categorized as something because it's so big. But if we connect with people, then it's that something is something that we can take on together, I feel. Let's go into the last question. So this one, I'm just really interested. So we've been talking a lot about the things that we can do and ways that we can help students, ways that we can help them translate their value and help them discover their own value is a big thing, which is all valuable for those going onto the market as well. But I mean, okay, so here we are, we're in COVID. We have the picture of I just read this morning that the 2 kids that shared the picture got suspended in Georgia and all that kind of stuff. Like, I mean, what is the future? Like, how do we do everything we've been talking about amidst everything that is happening? Let's go ahead. Let's start with Dr. Frazier, and then go around, and we'll plan on wrapping up around 9:50.
So I think competency-based education is a lot of where that's going. I know the university I teach at, Southern New Hampshire University, is transitioning to competency-based education. I know a lot of other schools are doing the same. But I also think that even in research-intensive universities, partnering with industry is going to become more and more productive and a bigger part of even your traditional lab, particularly in social sciences, because folks in industry and in government have a lot of control and can do things that people in universities, especially now, can't do. For example, our work in research continues because as far as our government-run law firm is concerned, people still need defending, and the courts are still taking cases. So you might be home, but I've got a full workload. So if students need experience, or if you need data for your next project, it's much easier to work with me than to try to do it on your own. So I think those will be the two core areas. I think we're going to go more into competency-based training, which will require some industry contribution because they know what they need better than anybody else. And more partnerships in research.
Okay, yeah. Here's how I would really like to have some answers. So, because based on what you just said, Dr. Frazier, so Myra, could you kind of speak to that about yes, there is value in establishing connections with industry, and then Dr. Mckoy, could you talk about which institutions are going to get access to which industries, coming from HBCU, and then we can kind of wrap it up with Sammie, who is working in University of Florida is PWI, predominantly white institution, and some of the opportunities that you could see, for your students that you have as well.
Sure. So I think from an industry perspective, right, we have been pushing for institutions to make a move towards competency-based learning. And we're helping them. It's not only pushing, saying, you have to do this, right? But it's actually helping institutions. I do a lot of work with Bowie State, working with Dr. Rose Shumba, who I absolutely admire. And she is like my powerhouse. And at SNU, I'm also working with the teams there. And in Florida, I'm working with Miami-Dade College. So I think it's making that move towards competency-based, but also institutions working together. So, and that is people are like, what do you mean institutions working together, right? But you guys have to share resources, have to share what's working, what's not working, and really try to put your heads together and not work in a silo. We're Bowie State and we only do Bowie State. I mean, you're in a network of HBCUs and, there's a bunch of other PWI institutions that are willing to help. And how do you leverage those resources to build those competency-based programs with industry? And as far as access to industry, I think that it's the wild, wild west out there. And so your opportunities now, just get on it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Really quickly, I guess what I would say, even though we do have an understanding or conversations about who has access to what, I think we need to start what do our students have access to? Not the institution themselves. We've already seen, we kind of went through this moment here where we had students who didn't have laptops, they didn't have phones, they didn't have access to internet. We had kids who couldn't eat, we had kids who had to quit their jobs. So for me personally, let's start on that level of addressing what our students are having to face before we can even think about this industry thing. Because if I don't have something to eat, I'm really not studying this industry conversation, right? So I think that's where my shift is, and understanding what that access could even look like when we first address what our students are needing during the national pandemic before we can even kind of get to the competency conversation. That's just kind of, I guess I'm flipping it the other way.
So Dr. Mckoy, I just want to share with you that you shouldn't separate them. I'm doing a lot.
No, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was saying we're doing a lot of work with institutions to help close that digital divide and try to figure out how do we help students gain access to, because it's about access and equity, right? So it's helping establish those normals first before, but I think industry can help you with that.
Well, I don't think it's necessarily a separation per se, right? But all I'm saying is we're really going to have conversations. I think when we think of, I'm trying to think of, it's something that's just happened recently. We're talking about trying to make sure we help get homeless people jobs, right? So Like, it's like, but wait a minute, but they're still homeless. Like, we still kind of like, we're thinking of it the opposite way, right? So I think that you're right. Like, we can combine these resources and these tools. They do need to come together. But what I'm thinking of when we went to the automatic shutdown in March, it didn't matter what I was trying to teach my students for that. Like, whatever I said, child, it was this. They didn't care. Like, they look, my internet don't work. All right, babe, we're going to figure it out. And I think like that's what I'm thinking of until at least we can kind of get a solid footing with the national pandemic and what's kind of going to happen over the next 6 months to the next year. But yes, Myra, I definitely agree with you.
Yes, and then thinking to what student needs are, student wants are whatnot, like those basic safety needs definitely need to be assessed by universities, supported by universities, more having specific food pantries or are compensating student employees who aren't currently able to work right now on their Pell Grant-based work study payments and whatnot. I think additionally, and Gen Z, or at least thinking about traditional undergraduate students, right? We of course have adult learners, commuter students, folks who are associated with the military of different ages, or folks with families. But at least thinking about Generation Z, there was already a lot of stress related to careers due to like growing up related to the 2008 recession and the current recession now. And so I think when students are thinking about career, unfortunately, it's a lot around fear and deficit. What can I get? Do I need to get a gig job? Do I need to have a side hustle? How am I going to support myself? And how am I going to build a career in my major or around at least some of the things that I'm interested in? And so in a coaching perspective, there's a lot that goes with those helping skills. We really need to be outreaching to students individually. When I meet with students and I haven't seen them in a couple of weeks, I send a message saying, hey, I'm just checking in. You can always set another appointment, but I hope you're doing all right. And that's one of the things that was stressed to me during one of a symposium hosted by our Office of Academic Support, is those individualized connections are so important. And students can either run toward career because they're like, oh, I fear that I don't have something, or run away from it because it's so stressful. There's a lot of ways to move around some of those problems. And so humanizing career, as you talked about, Dr. Mckoy, understanding that career is part of identity development. It's also, so that can be related and tied to other types of identity development. So racial and ethnic, sexual orientation, understanding how you navigate in the world, who you are as a person, and career can be a part of that.
This is so amazing. I love, like, career is tied to identity development and all these things. What people aren't seeing on the screen is just like there's a really cool private chat over here saying like, wow, like we need to talk more about this afterwards. And this is exactly what I had hoped to have happen, of just really, I think that thinking retroactively about this panel specifically and about higher ed is that this really is an attempt to do these things of like bringing people together from different areas and saying, hey, let's actually get together on a screen and have a common language, have a common understanding. Because I think that we are all extremely passionate about helping students. I think that's very, very clear that that is something that, and I think a lot of the people that are watching really, really value about this sector and this thing that we can do to teach people. And so thank you so much for being here and for sharing your insights and your expertise. I'm going to wave goodbye to you. You can wave goodbye as well. I'm going to, then I'll just click some buttons and wrap it up. So thank you so much for being here, everybody. Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
We appreciate it. Have a great day.
Bye. I hope everyone has a great day.
All right. Bye.
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 Oh, wrong buttons. Okay, everybody, this was, I think, another great feel. I was really excited at this panel, especially in this conversation that was going on in the chat, and just really understanding that there are needs that we can be doing as universities and as people for our students, but we also need to make sure that we're keeping care of ourselves, that we need to not stretch ourselves too thin, because that will just not be good for anybody. And so just making sure that we collaborate. I mean, that's the key. Collaborate, work with people, communicate, open those lines. So as we move on, so right now, going to be starting in a few minutes, we have the AMA by Michelle Campbell. I designed a free career development course for grad students, 150 enrolled. Ask me anything. We have Alan Langer, optimize your LinkedIn profile to be seen and remembered. And Christine Lodge, reframing your academic mindset, how to identify and shift the beliefs that hold you back. And so I hope that you join one of those, and we'll see you again in an hour for our next panel, which is K-12 educators. It's time we empower those who have empowered us. Thank you. Have a great day.